It started with smoke. Thick, dark, crawling up the morning sky like a warning I didn't see coming. I was standing in the driveway of my lake mansion. The house I'd built with 10 years of sleepless nights and courtroom victories. And that's when I saw it, flames licking the cedar walls like they'd been waiting their whole life to burn. At first I froze. I couldn't even scream. That house wasn't just a house. It was my peace, my escape, my reward after years of dealing with other people's lies. And now it was burning. Neighbors started gathering across the street, phones in their hands, whispers floating through the smoke. And then I saw her, Margaret, the HOA president, standing there with her little clipboard, watching like she was proud. I ran toward her. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted. She didn't even blink. She just looked at me and said, "You were warned, Daniel. The HOA doesn't tolerate unpaid fees." Unpaid fees. That's what she called it. I'd missed one payment. One. Because their system glitched and double-charged me the month before. I had the receipt. I had the email. But none of that mattered now. The fire roared louder. Glass exploded from the windows. The reflection of my own life melting right in front of me. Fire trucks pulled up but too late. Everything was gone before they even rolled out the hoses. When the chief came over, he told me something that made my stomach twist. "The fire started from the back fence line," he said. "Accelerant found in multiple spots." That meant one thing. It wasn't an accident. Margaret turned away before I could say a word. She climbed into her SUV, her little HOA logo shining on the door, and drove off like she'd just finished a routine inspection. I stood there for hours, watching the smoke rise over the lake, listening to the crackle of what used to be my home. And deep down, something inside me snapped. See, most people don't know this. Before I retired to that mansion, I was a federal judge. I'd spent half my life in courtrooms, handing down sentences to people who thought they could get away with anything. But I never thought I'd end up on the other side. Over the next few days, the HOA sent me a letter. They called the burned property a community hazard. They fined me for the damage. They said it was my fault for neglecting maintenance. The same people who burned my home were now billing me for the ashes. I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight. I went through every document I had. Every email. Every payment confirmation. Every HOA notice. And there it was, a trail of threats dressed up as reminders. Margaret had signed each one personally. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to make an example out of me. Because I was the one who didn't bow down to her fake authority. The one who told her I wouldn't paint my dock beige because it disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic. That was my first violation. Then came the mailbox. Then the grass height. Then improper lighting on the porch. It never ended. They were obsessed with control. And when control failed, they lit the match. The insurance company sent their investigators. The report came back. Arson. Intentional. Multiple ignition points. But they said they couldn't cover it because the suspect was affiliated with the property management board, which technically wasn't under my direct policy. Translation: I was on my own. I packed what little I had left. A charred photo of my wife. A melted clock from my study. And one thing I'd kept locked in a safe that somehow survived. My old courtroom robe. I remember holding it and whispering to myself, "They think I'm done. But they have no idea who they just crossed." I spent the next month quietly rebuilding my case. Not as a victim, but as an attorney. I pulled public records. Financial audits. Emails between HOA board members. And what I found was worse than I imagined. They'd been overcharging homeowners for years. Funneling maintenance funds into private accounts. Holding fake meetings. And silencing anyone who questioned their numbers. Burning my mansion wasn't about fees. It was about hiding evidence. See, my house had cameras. Cameras pointed right toward the lake. And right toward the HOA shed behind the clubhouse. The footage was stored off-site, cloud backup I'd forgotten about. When I logged in, my heart stopped. There they were. 3 figures in the night. One of them, unmistakably Margaret, holding a red gas can. The other setting fire to the grass line. The date stamped clear as day. I didn't go to the police right away. I went to the courthouse. My courthouse. Because what they didn't know was that I had been reinstated on an interim basis for a new case rotation just weeks before the fire. They burned the wrong man's house. When the first hearing notice went out, it listed my initials. Judge Daniel R. Harland. The same name Margaret had seen printed on all the HOA warnings she'd mailed. Only now it wasn't her name on the paper. It was under the defendant line. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't show my anger. I waited. Because justice is slow. but it's steady. And the day the HOA board members walked into my courtroom, I was already sitting behind the bench. Rope pressed. Gavel waiting. Files open. And that same burned photo of my wife tucked beside me as a reminder of what they took. They looked up and froze. The whisper spread through their lawyers like wildfire. Margaret's face turned pale. For the first time, she didn't have a clipboard to hide behind. "Good morning," I said. Voice steady. Eyes locked on hers. "Let's begin." And that was just the start. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the echo of their shoes against the tile floor as the HOA board took their seats. Margaret sat at the front. Her chin raised like she still thought she was in control. But I could see it, that flicker of fear behind her eyes. I leaned forward slightly. The nameplate on my bench gleamed under the light. Judge Daniel R. Harland. She read it again and again like her mind was refusing to believe it. For years she'd written my name at the top of every HOA letter. Every fine. Every threat. And now that same name was the one she'd have to answer to. Their lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "we're here today regarding a series of accusations that we believe are exaggerated." I nodded slowly. "Proceed," I said. He started his speech. About community guidelines. About unpaid fees. About how the HOA was only protecting neighborhood standards. But every word felt hollow. Like reading rules out of a book that had already burned. When he finished, I turned to the prosecution table. That was my ally now, the state attorney who had taken over after I turned over the evidence. "Call your first witness," I said. The door opened. A young fire investigator walked in. His uniform crisp. His eyes steady. He placed a folder on the stand. "State your name for the record." "Detective Alan Mercer," he said. "And your role in this investigation?" I was the lead fire investigator assigned to the Harlan residence case. Margaret shifted in her seat. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. The detective continued. "Our analysis confirmed multiple points of ignition. Gasoline residue was found along the fence line. The accelerant trail led directly from the HOA maintenance shed." He opened the folder. Photographs slid out one by one. Charred wood. Melted fencing. And then, the image of a red gas can half buried in ash. "Your Honor," the detective said, "the fingerprints on that can matched one of the HOA board members, a Mr. Richard Klein." Richard flinched. He was sitting 2 chairs behind Margaret. His hands trembled just slightly. I watched his eyes dart toward her. And hers dart right back, cold and sharp like a warning. The courtroom whispered. People leaned forward. Neighbors. Journalists. Even a few members from other HOAs who'd come to watch. I lifted my gavel lightly. "Order," I said. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. Everyone fell silent. "Detective," I asked, "were there any recordings?" He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The homeowner had surveillance cameras connected to a cloud backup system. The footage recovered shows 3 individuals entering the property line the night of the fire. "Can you identify them?" He turned toward the screen behind him. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life. And there it was. The night my home burned. The footage showed the lake faintly glowing under the moonlight. Then movement. 3 figures. One of them, unmistakably Margaret, holding a gas can. The others crouched low, dragging something across the grass. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't even breathe for a moment. Then I turned my eyes toward her. She sat frozen. Her lips parted just slightly, but no words came out. The lawyer for the HOA jumped up. "Objection," he shouted. "Your Honor, this footage has not been independently verified." "Overruled," I said calmly. "The metadata and timestamps match the fire report." "Continue." Margaret's face turned pale. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. And I could see it now, the collapse of her power. The woman who had burned down my life thinking she was untouchable. The detective finished his statement and stepped down. Then came the financial expert. Then the homeowners who'd been bullied. Each one told a story. Each one another nail in the coffin of that corrupt board. A retired teacher spoke softly. "They fined me $200 because my grandson's bicycle was left on the porch overnight," she said. Her eyes welled with tears. "I couldn't afford groceries that month. They didn't care." Another man stood. "They made me repaint my fence 3 times. Said the color was too bright. Every time I paid they raised the fee." By the time the testimonies ended, the truth was laid bare. It wasn't about rules. It was about power, control, money, and revenge. I dismissed the witnesses and looked directly at the defense table. Margaret didn't lift her eyes. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. I leaned back slightly. "Mrs. Avery," I said. That was her full name. Margaret Avery. "Would you like to speak?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally she stood. Her voice was quiet at first, almost trembling. "Your Honor," she said, "we did what we thought was best for the community." "The community?" I repeated softly. "The same community whose homes you overcharged? Whose residents you threatened? The same one you endangered when you set fire near the lakeside in the middle of summer?" Her lips tightened. "I didn't light that fire," she said. "Then who did?" I asked. She hesitated, looked back at Richard, at the other board members. And for the first time the silence in that room felt heavy. I could see it happening. Her mind unraveling. The guilt catching up. Or maybe it wasn't guilt, maybe it was fear. "Mr. Klein acted alone," she said quickly. He went too far. None of us knew." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "That's a lie," he shouted. "You gave the order. You told me to make sure he never comes back to the neighborhood." Gasps filled the room. The lawyer buried his face in his hands. The reporters scrambled for notes. And I just sat there, so quiet, letting the truth speak for itself. "Enough," I said finally. "Both of you will have your turn to testify under oath." The bailiff called for recess. The gavel came down, and I stood slowly, walking out of the chamber into the judge's chambers behind me. I closed the door and leaned against the wall. My hands trembled just slightly, because even though I'd been in courtrooms my whole life, this one felt different, personal. Through the window, I could still see the faint line of smoke rising over the lake in the distance. The smell of ashes never really left my memory, but this time it didn't make me weak. It reminded me why I was there. When court resumed, I could see they were breaking. One by one, the HOA members began turning on each other. Deals, plea bargains, confessions. The truth came pouring out faster than I expected. It turned out Margaret had been embezzling HOA funds for over 6 years. Richard was her enforcer, the one who handled violations and enforcement visits. And when I started digging into their records before the fire, they panicked. They wanted the mansion gone because it held digital records of their illegal payments, backups stored in a server inside my office. But they didn't know those same backups were already mirrored to a cloud. Every transaction, every forged signature, all sitting in a folder titled HOA Fraud Review. The prosecution presented the data. It was irrefutable. And as each file flashed on the screen, Margaret's confidence melted away like the walls of my old home. Finally, I turned toward her. "Mrs. Avery," I said, "you said you acted in the interest of the community. Tell me, is this what community looks like?" She looked up slowly, and for a moment I thought I saw regret. But then she shook her head. Her voice cracked. "I did what I had to," she whispered. "They would have voted me out. I built that neighborhood. I kept it perfect." I stared at her for a long time. Perfection. That's what she called it. But all I saw was destruction. When the session ended, I removed my robe quietly. The bailiff collected the evidence. The jury would deliberate soon. But deep down I already knew the outcome. I walked out of the courthouse as the sun began to set. The same orange glow that once reflected off my mansion now painted the sky again. But this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like closure waiting to happen. Margaret and her board had destroyed my home. But they'd also exposed themselves. And I was going to make sure the world saw exactly who they were. Because this wasn't just about one fire. It was about every homeowner they'd bullied. Every family they'd threatened. Every dollar they'd stolen. Justice was coming. And this time it was personal. The final day of trial began with rain. A slow drizzle tapping against the courthouse windows like a heartbeat. Everyone in the room knew what was coming. You could feel it in the air. That kind of silence that only happens when justice is about to land. The jurors filed in quietly. Margaret sat at the defense table. Her face pale. Her eyes red from sleepless nights. The rest of the HOA board sat behind her, broken shadows of their former selves. I watched them from my bench. It wasn't satisfaction that filled me. It was something heavier. Something closer to closure. They had taken everything from me. But they couldn't take who I was. The courtroom doors closed. The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise," he said. Everyone stood as I entered the chamber. The sound of shuffling feet echoed through the hall like waves against a dock. When I sat, I looked at the jurors. 12 faces. Ordinary people. Neighbors. Homeowners. People who knew what it felt like to be controlled by someone who thought rules made them powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I said softly, "have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, a folded paper in hand. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." The paper was passed forward. The bailiff took it and placed it in front of me. I unfolded it slowly. The ink slightly smudged from the rain outside. But the words were clear. On the charge of arson, guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. On all counts, guilty. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some people gasped. Some cried quietly. Others simply nodded, like justice had finally found its voice. I looked at Margaret. She didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared at the table in front of her like it was all a dream she couldn't wake from. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. The other board members began to tremble. Their empire had fallen in one stroke. I leaned forward. "Mrs. Avery," I said, "would you like to speak before sentencing?" She lifted her head slowly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said. "I just wanted him to follow the rules. Everyone else did. He thought he was above them." I let her words hang in the air. Then I answered. "I spent 20 years on this bench," I said. "I've seen men who stole out of desperation. I've seen people who lied to protect their families. But I've never seen anyone destroy lives for the sake of control." She lowered her eyes. The sound of the rain grew louder against the glass. I continued. "You burned down my home. You called it justice. But what you really wanted was obedience. You thought fear could keep people quiet." Her hands clenched. A single tear rolled down her cheek. But there was no apology. No remorse. Only the silence of someone who finally understood that her power was gone. I picked up the gavel. "For the crimes committed," I said clearly, "this court sentences you to 25 years in federal custody." The bailiff stepped forward. The cuffs clicked. And as Margaret was led away, she turned once more toward me. Her voice cracked. "You'll never get that house back," she said. I nodded slowly. "No," I replied. "But I'll make sure no one else loses theirs to people like you." The gavel came down. And just like that, it was over. The crowd stood. Reporters rushed out. The sound of footsteps faded down the hall. I sat there for a long time after everyone left. The courtroom empty. The air still. Then I took off my robe, folded it neatly, placed it in my briefcase, and walked outside into the rain. The courthouse steps were slick and cold. But when I looked across the horizon, I could see the faint outline of my lake. The same place where my mansion once stood. It was quiet now. Peaceful. Almost like it was waiting for something new to rise. Weeks passed. The case made headlines everywhere. HOA president sentenced for arson and fraud. Judge turns tables on corrupt HOA. It spread faster than the fire that started it all. People from all over the state wrote letters, thanking me, telling their own stories of being bullied by HOAs. Some even started petitions for reform, for new laws, for fairness. And one afternoon as I was walking by the lake, I saw something that stopped me. A small wooden post sticking out of the ground near where the mansion used to be. Someone had nailed a sign to it. Hand-painted letters that said, "Justice rebuilt here." I didn't know who put it there. Maybe one of the neighbors. Maybe one of the families who watched everything unfold. But it meant more than any headline ever could. Over the months that followed, I decided not to rebuild the mansion. Not yet. Instead, I built something smaller, simpler. A cabin. Just enough for me, a desk and a view of the lake. Every morning I'd sit by the window, coffee in hand, watching the water ripple gently against the shore. The smell of smoke was gone now, replaced by pine and rain. And sometimes when the light hit the lake just right, I could almost see the reflection of what once was. Not as loss, but as proof of what survived. People think justice is about punishment. It's not. It's about truth. About balance. About knowing that even when the world burns, the truth still rises from the ashes. One evening I got a letter from the state. They wanted me to return to the bench full-time. To oversee a new division, one that handled property disputes and HOA regulations. I smiled when I read it, because maybe that was the real ending. Not revenge. Not rebuilding. But change. The first case I took after returning was simple. A young couple had been fined for hanging a swing set in their yard. I read the complaint. I read the bylaws. Then I looked at them and said, "Dismissed." The parents cried. The HOA representative stormed out. And for the first time in a long while, I laughed. quietly, peacefully. Because that's how it should have been all along. The lake outside my window still shimmers every morning. The same lake that reflected my burning home now reflects something different. Calm, resilience, a second chance. Sometimes I still think about Margaret, where she is, what she thinks about in that cell. Does she understand what she lost? Or is she still convinced she was right? I guess I'll never know. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because I've already rebuilt the only thing that truly mattered, my peace. And maybe one day when this story becomes just another rumor people tell around the lake, someone will remember what it really meant. That power without compassion is just destruction. That rules mean nothing without fairness. And that even when your home burns to the ground, you can still rise, stronger, calmer, wiser. That night I stood by the shore again. The water was calm, the moonlight dancing across the surface. And I whispered softly to myself, they thought they buried me in ashes. But all they did was plant a seed. The wind carried the words away. The lake shimmered back like it understood. And I smiled. Because after everything, I was finally home again. If you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more insane HOA revenge stories. Because sometimes karma doesn't knock, it walks right into the courtroom.